Imagine, just for a second, waking up from a collective slumber that lasted nearly 1,000 years. The world around you, which used to be defined strictly by rigid survival and absolute obedience, suddenly bursts into this wild kaleidoscope of scientific curiosity, uncharted horizons, and profound self-discovery. Well, welcome to our explainer on the English Renaissance. Spanning from roughly 1500 to 1660, this wasn't just a time period on a calendar. It was an absolute earthquake in human history. Today, we're going to explore a cultural awakening that fundamentally rewired how humanity thought about love, power, and what it truly means to be alive. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the very word itself sets the stage for everything we're about to see. Renaissance comes from the French term for rebirth, and honestly, that's exactly what this was. After centuries of the Middle Ages, which, was a period often marked by intellectual stagnation and a hyper-focus on just spiritual survival, Europe began dusting off the ancient texts of Greece and Rome. They're rediscovering Homer, Plato, Cicero. So this isn't just some dusty historical timeline we're looking at. This is a thrilling intellectual rebirth, where classical learning, art, and philosophy came roaring back to life and collided with a rapidly modernizing world. So here is our roadmap for today. First, sparks of the rebirth. Second, the Renaissance mindset. Third, the four great eras. Fourth, evolution of literary forms. And finally, a lasting literary legacy. All right, Section 1, Sparks of the Rebirth. What exactly ignited the English Renaissance? You might be wondering, what kind of historical catalyst could possibly be powerful enough to set off this unprecedented literary and cultural explosion? Well, it was basically a perfect storm of 5 massive global shifts. You had the revival of classical learning bringing reason and beauty back to the forefront. And thanks to Johannes Gutenberg's printing press, these ideas spread like wildfire because books became vastly cheaper. Meanwhile, the Protestant Reformation shattered absolute church authority, which really demanded independent thought. Add in the Age of Discovery, proving the world was vastly larger than anyone had imagined, and together, all of this fueled the rise of humanism, an intellectual movement that shifted the focus entirely onto human dignity, education, and individual potential. Moving into Section 2, the Renaissance mindset, a paradigm shift in human thought. All of those massive historical events drove a fundamental change in how humanity actually viewed itself, and this brilliantly illustrates that shift. In medieval literature, the focus was almost entirely on God and the afterlife. Humans were pretty much viewed through a single lens, just sinners desperately seeking salvation. But in the Renaissance, the focus completely shifts to human nature, earthly emotions, and fierce personal ambitions. Humans are no longer just sinners. They're seen as these complex, dynamic individuals capable of extraordinary greatness. This secular individualism was a totally radical way of thinking for the time. And this shift is perfectly captured in what is arguably the most famous line in all of English literature, "To be or not to be," from Shakespeare's Hamlet. I mean, think about what this quote really represents. It's not a prayer, it's not some royal decree, it's a character entirely alone, struggling with personal choices, moral dilemmas, and intense inner conflict. If you've ever felt obsessed with your own personal identity or wrestled with a tough choice, your modern psychological introspection started right here with this exact Renaissance mindset. Okay, Section 3, the 4 great eras. Let's map out this 160-year journey. Now that we understand the mindset, let's walk through how this era unfolds across 4 distinct phases. We start in 1500 with the early Renaissance, where the foundational ideas are really poured. Then we hit 1558, the Elizabethan age. This is the undisputed golden age of booming creativity. But, things don't stay golden forever. By 1603, we enter the Jacobean age, taking a serious turn into darker psychological complexity. Finally, from 1625 to 1660, we have the Caroline and Commonwealth period, which is marked by intense political conflict that ultimately leads to civil war. Notice how the overall tone of the literature perfectly mirrors the political temperature of the time? Let's look at that early foundational phase. We have 3 absolute trailblazers here. Sir Thomas More wrote Utopia, giving us a whole new way to use literature for social and political criticism. Then you have Sir Thomas Wyatt, who traveled to Italy and brought the sonnet back to England. And Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, took that sonnet and refined it, while also introducing blank verse. That's poetry that doesn't rhyme, but has a strict heartbeat-like rhythm. I really want you to remember that term, blank verse, because these guys literally invented the physical tools that the next generation of giants would use to build their masterpieces. And wow, did they ever build masterpieces? We arrive at 1558, the Elizabethan age. Under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England experienced unparalleled political stability. And what happens when a nation is stable and proud? Its culture flourishes. This is the golden age for sure. Literature absolutely exploded into rich poetic expression, tales of courtly love, and a booming theater scene the likes of which the world had never seen before. Leading the charge were revolutionaries like Edmund Spenser. He's often called the poet's poet. He wrote The Faerie Queene, this massive, highly musical, allegorical epic that pushed the boundaries of the English language while celebrating virtue and the queen herself. Alongside him was Christopher Marlowe, who was kind of the bad boy of the Renaissance. Marlowe completely revolutionized drama. Before him, plays were relatively simple. Marlowe introduced wildly ambitious heroes who challenged limits and authority, like in Dr. Faustus. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is William Shakespeare's sheer range. He took the tools Surrey and Marlowe invented and absolutely mastered them across an unbelievable variety of genres. He mastered deeply psychological tragedies like Macbeth and Othello. He wrote brilliant, witty comedies like Twelfth Night, and he wrote sweeping nationalistic histories like Richard III. And this is just a fraction of his work, which also includes 154 of the greatest lyric sonnets ever written. Shakespeare transformed English drama into a world-class art form, exploring these huge universal themes of jealousy, power, and mortality. But, after Queen Elizabeth passes, the golden shine begins to wear off a bit. We enter the Jacobean age in 1603, named for the new monarch, King James I. The tone of the nation, and therefore the literature, really shifts. We start seeing political uncertainty, religious conflict, and a heightened awareness of moral corruption. So the literature becomes considerably darker, heavier, and more cynical. It plunges much deeper into psychological complexity. This darker era gives us writers with serious bite. Ben Jonson becomes the master satirist, using sharp realism to mock human greed in plays like Volpone. Then we have John Donne, the pioneer of metaphysical poetry. Forget simple love songs. Donne used intense intellectual arguments, philosophy, and wild, unusual comparisons called conceits to explore spirituality and romance. Finally, as the era collapses into the political chaos of the Caroline period, we get John Milton. His epic poem Paradise Lost represents the ultimate culmination of the Renaissance, a massive, grand exploration of free will, divine justice, and human rebellion. Section 4. Evolution of Literary Forms. Let's look at the tools of the rebirth. So, we've seen the writers and the eras, but how did the physical mechanics of writing actually evolve during this time? Well, this evolution happened in 3 distinct ways. First, writers elevated drama, using blank verse to inject psychological realism and complex tragic heroes into the theater. Drama became a truly sophisticated art. Meanwhile, poetry flourished, with the sonnet becoming the ultimate playground for capturing human emotion, while epic poetry allowed writers to build these vast mythological worlds. Finally, prose expanded far beyond utilitarian church texts. Writers began using prose to debate politics, document scientific discoveries, philosophize, and write about world travel. Literature was breaking out of the church and into every single corner of human existence. And finally, Section 5, a lasting literary legacy, why this era still matters today. So, the crucial point is, why does an era that ended in 1660 still command so much of our attention today? The achievements of the English Renaissance are simply monumental. First and foremost, it established English as a major, globally recognized literary language. Before this, Latin was the language of serious thought. Second, it built the very foundations of modern drama that every screenwriter and playwright still relies on right now. It blew the doors off literary themes, proving that love, ambition, and secular human relationships were just as worthy of exploration as theology. It championed individual expression, and crucially, without this era, later literary movements like Romanticism and Modernism simply would not have a foundation to stand on. Our entire tradition of literature flows directly from this wellspring. Which leaves us with a profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Would our modern understanding of the individual, your sense of self, your right to inner conflict, your belief in human potential, would any of that even exist without the groundwork laid during this 16-year rebirth? It's fascinating to realize that the way we tell stories today, and the very way we understand our own minds, was permanently forged by a cultural awakening over 400 years ago. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this absolutely incredible slice of human history.